Peace and blessings, family. This is, oh my bad, your brother, asarimhotep, with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And it is Wednesday, aka Ujima, November the 15th, 2023. And we are going to do a little linguistic work here. As always, there is ongoing conversations on the relations, on the nature of the ancient Egyptian society. And you know how we do here. We always make the connections that the certain others can't make because it's not their tradition in culture. And so today we're going to be talking about the connection between the name Pharaoh in ancient Egyptian and the name of the town Ile-Ife in Yoruba land, aka Southwest Nigeria. And we're going to have a good time. So this program won't be too long, hopefully. But I may even open it up to comments or whatnot, since I haven't been on in a while. So y'all just sit back, relax, and we'll be back in just a few. Okay. Hotep, peace and blessings. Thank you all for joining the Mbongi. And this is the community center where we share vital information that is important to the growth and health of, African people worldwide. And I just want to send some love and shout outs to everyone who is catching this program live. And of course, each and every one of you who are catching the archive of this conversation. And as usual, I like to shout out and acknowledge everyone who has made themselves known in the comment section. So we are streaming on X or Twitter, Facebook, as well as YouTube. So if you're on X or Twitter, your comments won't show up on my screen here, but I'll try to flip through there and acknowledge you all if you have made a comment there. But on my YouTube and Facebook channels, love and light to Teti Ursa Ma'at Rasa Neferu, who is in the building, and Born Eternal Lord Allah is in the building. Thanks for joining. And our good brother Obama is in the building, and I haven't forgotten about you, and I'll be responding to your email Friday. So keep that in mind. So be on the lookout for my email on Friday. Everything is in the building. And Machona Nuno, if I'm saying that correctly, which I'm probably not, but thank you for joining the conversation. Hotep to you. Ogun's Machete is in the building. Thank you for joining us. And Emmanuel Adama, peace and blessings, good brother. Always good to see you. And Ma'ak Heru is in the building. He says, what about the Igbo language? I need to get a partner. So like in 2024, I'm going to start, kind of introducing some guest hosts, every now and then, and certain partners. I'm a partner with certain folks so that we can bring this information, especially with native born Africans who speak the native languages. So we'll team up and do joint presentations, or I may even just let them rock on the channel. But besides my line brother in the frat, well, there's a few people who I know who are Igbo speakers, but I don't deal with that language too much. So for me, the Yoruba language is because of my participation in the Isheshe tradition, Ifa divination, and the like. So of course that comes with the Yoruba language. So, but I do need to team up with some folks on the Igbo language, and if you know someone or you are down, holla at me. Let's make it happen. So peace and blessings always to our good sister Tamika One, who is in the building. And of course, everything is always I'm a piano vibes on this program. And our good brother H-Town representing David Shaw is in the building. Thank you for joining us. And the West Coast is in the house. Peace and blessings to you, Sister GG. Travel Light is in the building. Hoppy Valley Farms. Peace and blessings to you, Hotep. And another all out west in the building, Al Cabulon Mine. She says, and we're growing and healing, and I am here, but working, so we'll not engage too much. Love y'all. Love you back. And I understand it's we're 3 hours behind. Excuse me. The West Coast is 3 hours behind us over here on the East Coast. So it's what 3 o'clock there, so it's still work hours. We were just getting off over here on the East Coast, but I try to balance the time for our people overseas as well. So it's not 2-3 in the morning when we are doing the live shows. So Dasha Rob is in the building. Peace and blessings to you, as well as Montebello is in the building. Thank you for coming on the program. And then just as I said that, this is what I mean. Our good brother Conan Lee is in the building all the way in the UK, across the waters. Thank you for joining the program this evening. So, before we get started, I'm going to need each and every one of you. That is right. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe if you are new to the program, to the Mbongi community, and please share with your friends. And hold on. I am just going to start sharing my screen. And we'll do the entire screen. So let's do that. And let me make that big so that y'all can see the text. And we will get started from the beginning, as always, because you always got to start from the beginning. So as you can see from the title of this presentation, I got this little bar at the bottom. I don't even know if y'all can see that, but let me click that out there. There we go. Titled Ile-Ife as Home of the Pharaoh. And what you can see right there on the right-hand side of the screen is one of the early, Nok terracotta, carvings out in Southwest Nigeria. And we can tell by the scarification that these were, early Yoruba folks. And, we deal heavily with the Yoruba here. And so, the point of this conversation is, again, there are many folks, of course, in academia and especially in YouTube land. And, it's an ongoing fight and engagement as it regards to understanding, the evolution, the development, the peopling, the religion, culture, and the worldview of the ancient Egyptians. And so it is a very nuanced and it's a very complex history. And so what you find a lot are those individuals who are very anti-African, who try to whitewash the history and the people of ancient Kemet, ancient Tamari, ancient Egypt, and try to make them anything other than African people. And uh, and so what they'll try to do is to euphemize, and what I mean by that is, make a euphemism of words like Afrocentricity, and they'll try to label you an Afrocentrist when you speak of the relationship between ancient Egypt and the rest of quote unquote Black Africa. Now, which is very dumb, primarily because you cannot speak about ancient Kemet without being African centered, since you're talking about an African country that spoke an African language that had an African culture. And so, anytime you are doing any kind of academic work, especially in the social sciences, you always, when you're speaking about a people, you always have to come from the perspective of the people themselves. So that would make you whatever centric that is, because you're centering the culture, you're centering the testimonies, the language, the worldviews, the acts of the people themselves. And the fact that the ancient Egyptians were African people, their language is African, it's related to other African languages, et cetera, et cetera. You can only have a discussion about ancient Egypt from an Afrocentric perspective. And so we will do other programs on exactly what Afrocentricity is, because a lot of people who are using these terms don't know what that term means and how it is used, and understand the academic rules of engagement for doing Afrocentric work in the larger field, which is a bona fide academic field of Africology. You can go to a number of universities and get PhDs in Africology. So, what I want to do is to help, of course, arm you with information and more so research methods on how to tear down a number of these types of arguments. And so, one of my major tools is the tool of historical comparative linguistics. And this is what we'll be doing here today. So, as just a reminder here, these programs are the result of community support and sponsorship. And so, if you want to support this channel and get exclusive interviews early and some other details that a lot of folks don't get out here in the public, consider joining the Patreon page. And this is the address that you find on the screen, as well as you can support by purchasing text from the publishing company, Madu and Della Press. And the latest text that we have coming out, or that has come out, is Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards a Meaning for the Place Name Kemet. And we have a number of texts that will be released in 2024, and I'm excited to present that to you. So, of course, some text from me, some text from Dr. Chilima Limamukinge, some other edited texts from some other African scholars. And so, we're going to, we take this work seriously, and we want to, present it to you. So thank you all who have supported this text already. And for those of you who plan to buy in the future, your support is greatly appreciated as well. And with the text comes the paradigm of Chicam, which we won't get into right now, but just knowing that this is something that I'm working on diligently in the background, so you'll hear more about this in the near future. So the conversation that we're having today has to deal with Ile-Ife in Yoruba land. And so this is a map that you can just go on Google Maps And when you type in Ile-Ife or Ife, this is the map that comes up. So this is it. If you can see my mouse circling Ife right now, this is where it's located. And here are some surrounding communities, towns, villages, important spots or whatnot, roads, highways, and the like. And and just to give you a little background about what Ile-Ife is, Ife is an ancient Yoruba city in southwestern Nigeria. Recent in-depth archaeologically, recent in-depth archaeologically estimates. I don't know who, my bad. I copied this from Wiki, and I should have caught this. It should just simply be recent in-depth archaeological estimates suggest Ife's founding to be between the 10th century BC and the 6th century BC, and is widely agreed upon by historians to be the oldest amongst the classical and post-classical Yoruba city-states. Right? So this is an ancient city, and it's comparable to, around the time of the Demotic script in ancient Egypt, and in that time period. So, this is very old. And so you may be familiar with some of the bronze heads from Ife, depicting royalty, and here is the Ade crown, with these things, and this might be representing like a snail shell, dealing with Oduduwa, which we'll get into a little bit a little later. So from here, this from the British Museum, from which this photo was taken, the British Museum website, 3 head sculptures from Ife, capital of the Kingdom of Ife, 11th to 15th century, in what is today southern Nigeria. The left and right examples are painted plaster casts of brass originals. The center head is a brass original, and then it gives a little details about what they are. So very good and detailed artwork, and we may just have to do a show on the classical Yoruba artwork and what the symbols and things mean, and I may team up with an expert on that coming on the channel. So when you say Ile-Ife, the word Ile is the word for house or place, right? And there's a variant of this, which is Ilu, which means a city or a town. They're built off of the same root. And the word fe, which is a verb meaning to widen, to enlarge. So Ile-Ife is the wide house, or essentially the great house, right? And as it states here, Ile-Ife, which is a sacred city, it's the cradle of the Yoruba, also believed to be the birthplace of mankind. And so that's when you get into the stories of the mythology of Oduduwa, which is sometimes either represented as an earth goddess, and sometimes as, a king. And there's some history that is, associated with that. And so we won't go too deep into that, but just know that, this is for example, a representation of Oduduwa in Yoruba land. And, this is the sacred city for which it is believed that mankind was born in. When you go across the world, whatever the sacred city is there, they all believe that mankind was born in that spot. So, we have our sacred cities just like anybody else in the rest of the world in Africa. And so that word Ile is in the word Onile, which means landlord or owner of the house, right? Onile, landlord. So we are comparing this term here, Ile-Ife, with the word Per and Ile, and Per and Ile is not how you pronounce it, but this is a way that y'all may be familiar with it. And so the phrase per which means palace or pharaoh, can be divided or broken up into two words: per, house, palace, temple, tomb, administration, and quote unquote meaning big, much, long, old, and sublime. Now this phrase here this word here, when we transliterate it to use or to be able to communicate on a computer screen, we transliterate this with a lowercase a and a capital A. But that's where we get the when you hear people say per that's where they get it from. But that's not how that is pronounced. And so, for example, when you find the word per later on in the Coptic language, this is how it is written, and they mistake the P in the front for the masculine definite article P. And but this is all one. This is per and then ro. And this is where you get, like, for example, in Greek, Pharaoh. And then same thing here in the Hebrew. So these are just different ways in which this so-called per became the word pharaoh in English, but it comes kind of a mixture of both of these, the Greek and the Hebrew that you see here. And you read the Hebrew from right to left. So ending in this H here. So these are the terms that we are comparing. Ile-Ife, which means essentially great house, or the house is wide and big or large, which is great. And the same thing here, this word per the meaning big, much, long, old, sublime, great, any of the adjectives that means large in size or big or great, right? So there have been attempts before to make connections between the Yoruba and ancient Egypt. And if any of y'all are familiar with my works, you know that I've cited a few of those, from Dr. Obinga. We've even had a professor out of London on this program who did his PhD dissertation on the connections between the Yoruba and ancient Egypt. And one who is not mentioned often, not that many people know of him, and that is Abdul Salau. And he did his dissertation on the Egyptian origin of the Yoruba. So the dissertation is titled Ancient Egyptian Origin of Yoruba of West Africa, a Comprehensive Scientific Approach. Now, I personally have a lot of critiques about this dissertation, and he has yet to, I guess, fully complete the work and turn it into a book, which is often happens. Usually a lot of folks, once they get their PhDs, they'll do some additional work and research, and they will convert their PhD dissertation into a text for the public. So this hasn't been done yet, but he received his PhD from Temple University, Africology Department in 2007. So this is a more recent photo of him. This is when he was in school, and he actually studied under Obinga, and is just one of that ilk. However, when you go and he starts, for example, comparing the names of West African cities in Nigeria, more specifically in ancient Egyptian, like, this is what he has put forth. And there's some others, so I just kind of took a screenshot of this because it has number 6 is what we're going to be focusing on, which I blew up on the right here. But the problem with Salau is that when he does these comparisons with the ancient Egyptian in terms of the place names, he doesn't do the regular sound meaning correspondences that is required of the comparative method. And he doesn't, in this particular case, he doesn't provide the meanings of these words. He just, words that kind of look alike, like this word ta desher, at the bottom here. He just has a jase, but what does a jase mean? How is that broken down in Yoruba, and does that match the phrase ta desher, right? This sa here, he has sao, but what does sao mean in ancient Egyptian, and what does sao mean in Yoruba language? Is this, we understand that Yoruba land is Yoruba land, but there are other ethnic groups that live in this space. Are you sure that these are Yoruba place names, or could they be other place place names by other ethnic groups who live around the area, or an earlier group that the name just stuck, although the Yoruba may have moved in, etc. And so you have to consider that, especially if you're making the argument that the Yoruba people ultimately come from ancient Egypt as the title of your dissertation. So we have to be careful of work like this. And I think he ultimately he has enough to spark a to show us that there is smoke, but he hasn't provided the fire. Right. So you're going to have to do some additional work. And that's what I've been doing over the years. But for example, like if we look at number 6, he makes the connection between Ife, which we showed, here, that's the town of Ife, right? He says that this is the result of the Egyptians moving and bringing the word pe into the from this is a town in the northern part of Egypt, kind of close to the delta, or in the delta, right? So this is, but what he shows here is actually depth. So this is, I redid it here so it's clearer, just in case you can't see it here. So this is the hieroglyph for the D sound, and others you'll see the one that we transliterate for the capital D, which is the J sound. And then the box here, this is P, and then this is the 049 hieroglyph, for a city or a town along the Nile River, right? So this is depth. So what happened to the D? And so he says epe and ife, but he says pe here. So there is a P. This is where we get the word pe from, but it doesn't have this D in the front. So he probably meant this, but he, for some reason, put this here and doesn't explain depth, right? Like what is the nature of the loss of D in the Yoruba language, in the Yoruba language, that you would, equate this. So it's little stuff like this that we have to be careful of. And so I just wanted to put that out there, just in case any of y'all have come across this dissertation before. So, there have been other arguments in terms of the origin of the word Ife and where we get Ile-Ife from. And but I don't find this convincing, because he has not done, what is required in a linguistic analysis, and that's the demonstration of the regular sound meaning correspondences between 2 or more languages. So we will continue here. So what we'll be doing here is showing that the word per in the ancient Egyptian language is cognate with the word ile in the Yoruba language. And I wanted to highlight here, this is Rainer Hanning's, Wörterbuch Egyptian Dictionary. And, there's a section at the end of the book for toponyms, and this is written written in the German or Deutsch language here that you can see here. And you can see this is just, one screenshot here of, different place names and temples and whatnot that has this prefix of per. So you can see like this per ihi right here, right? Per iker, right? Per atum. So this is the name of a temple, dedicated to the god Atum. This is per a Ka-es. So the great house of his Ka, right? So this is a location. It's a either village, town, whatever. And so you can see, the difference between, for like in this example here, this is a temple versus like a city, because you can see the 049 glyphs, and here's the N23 irrigated land glyph. So this is, per achet, this is per achsib, per wisir, or the house of Osiris, etc., etc. Right. So you see that there's a tradition in ancient Egypt where locations are labeled with per being the prefix of the location names. So it's the place of or the house of, right? And so just like how you have in ancient Egypt, where these labels, these toponyms have per in front of the name of the location, you have the same thing going on in Nigeria. So you have, for example, Ile-Sa. You'll probably hear it more together, like Ilesa, when you go to Nigeria. Ile-Oloji. And then, of course, Ile-Ife. Right? So this is the house of Ife, the house of Oloji, the house of Sa. There's even a Ile-Odudua, right? But that Ile can also be suffixed to a term. So you have Oyo Ile or Aoya Ile, right? Ede Ile that you see here. So the Ile here could be prefixed or suffixed to the name of the location. So just wanted to let you know, so that we can see that in both places they use the same naming practice, using the same word, and we'll get to the proof of that in just a little bit. But I want to preface this, right, so that you understand, the direction in which we're going in. Now I'm doing some ongoing research, because there's also this place, there's this Iet, which means a place or a mound, and you would also see this in front of place names. So I may do a part 2 to this once I have completed this research. So don't mind this. This is just here as a placeholder for me when I come back and revisit this topic, right? And there's an important book that I highly recommend, that y'all get. And that is the Yoruba, A New History, here written by Dr. Akinwumi Ogundiran. And, this is a very comprehensive text on the history of the Yoruba people. And it is very insightful. And there's some things that I would add to that, because he's not doing a linguistic analysis. He doesn't do that kind of thing. But he's examining archaeological evidence, oral traditions, written traditions, and trying to develop a new history, because Yoruba history is kind of wonky, to say the least, because so much has happened. There's so many different groups involved, and the Yoruba, like many large groups, are actually kind of a mixture of different groups. And what became the Yoruba language was the dominant language. So some folks have lost their language. However, they have maintained their historical memory, right? And where they came from, where, what families they belong to, and the like. And so this is a very good text, but I really want y'all to pay attention to chapter 2. And he starts breaking down the emergence of a house society, and he starts explaining how a lot of these place names and groups and families started using Ile in front of these place names and regarding institutes and the like. And this may provide some grounding and a point of cultural reference when fully trying to understand what was going on in ancient Egypt and their usage of per. That so this is some ongoing research that I'm doing as well, seeing what ancient Egypt can tell us about Yoruba land and what Yoruba land can tell us about ancient Egypt in terms of this particular practice. And so he breaks it down from the the Ile to the Ilu, and that's a whole conversation in itself. So I don't want to go there. I just want to give you the reference. So again, this is a very good book that I recommend that you all get. The Yoruba, a New History. So so now, how is per related to Yoruba Ile? Now, as any follower of my work in this channel should know, that we look for the words that don't look alike, because those words that don't look alike in terms of possible cognates provide the strongest evidence of a historical and genetic relationship. So if we were to talk about per and then ile, they don't sound the same to the untrained eye. But that's why we have the historical comparative method to allow us to get to the heart of this. So I didn't come to this conclusion haphazardly that per is related to ile and that they derive from the same ancestral root, right? Or word, I should say. But before we go there, I want to put this in the fore of your mind. So this is a text that was published in 1949 by Dr. Lilius Homberger. She was a linguist and one of Cheikh Anta Diop's, earliest linguistic teachers. And she had been doing a lot of research on African languages. And, her hypothesis was that much of the West African languages actually derive from the ancient Egyptian language. And, she has her reasons for that. I don't agree with that. But there's some instances where, like in the case of Yoruba, that she may be right in some instances. And so it's just a matter of the detailed work to iron out what is inherited and what is the result of Egyptians moving into places like West and Central Africa. But what she highlights here on pages 226 and 227 is that when you are dealing with a lot of these West African languages, they are monosyllabic. But just because in the modern day they were monosyllabic does not mean that they've always had these forms, that monosyllabic form that we are familiar with. That, with comparison with ancient Egyptian, it shows us that a lot of these West African languages have lost syllables. So she states, this example shows how dangerous it is to consider the evolution of modern words, that means words, in the modern time, to have been always perfectly simple and uniform. And I highlight here, it also shows how the knowledge of the Egyptian form allows one to understand the modern forms. right? This is one of the reasons why we do comparisons with ancient Egyptian, because ancient Egyptian, especially like Middle Egyptian and Old Egyptian, is so old that these represent older forms of the ancestral forms that you find in many languages throughout Africa. So when you're dealing with a modern language, you know, especially for example, like a Yoruba language, where a lot of the words are in fact monosyllabic, that means consonant vowel, or consonant vowel consonant. But usually in the case of Yoruba, it's like consonant vowel, right? Even though it does have consonant vowel consonant and consonant vowel forms in the Yoruba language. But you know, Yoruba has a unique history, and so it's kind of beyond the scope of this conversation. But I just wanted to highlight that. So, for example, she gives uh, musgu and bola, sa, meaning to drink, to aspire. So you see here is just the consonant and then the vowel. So consonant vowel. And then in the Logone language, se, and in the Alo language, meaning yea, all meaning to drink. And so if one connects these forms with Coptic show, Seir, Yer, and Fulani, Jar, these appear to have a suffix R, and nothing explains the appearance of the palatal. That is the Y here and the sh here. Right. So if we was to compare this, we would think that the sa or say or yay is the monosyllabic root, the consonant vowel root, and that the R is somehow a lost suffix, right? And nothing explains the appearance of the palatal, which is also found in Hassa Shah. Kuka Kinga I seems to be unconnected or to be an example of metathesis. But if instead a simple form such as Coptic show, one starts from Old Egyptian suer, later sui, the palatal is explained by the W and A, which is year, with Y uh, equals R, and the other Y as a result of S eliminated. The change in Egyptian of voiceless to voice S justifies the variation of voiceless and voiced consonants attested by say and yay. So she's showing here that, you know, this is why we don't start with Coptic. We always start with Old Egyptian, Middle Kingdom, because by the time you get forms in Coptic, it loses, you know, its initial shape. Of course, you lose the determinatives or the classifiers, which help to explain the words better in written form, and even a lot of grammatical features, you know, attached to the word. You lose them in Coptic. So this is why you always start at the beginning and then work your way to Coptic, because Coptic will fool you, right? And so it's showing here. That's why this jar, you know, and Sier, Yer has the R, because in the earlier form there was an R. And so the final R became Y in Egyptian, right? And then it was later dropped, and that W became O, and there had to be a palatal vowel right behind it. So that's what made the S become sh in Coptic. So it became sho. So this is easily explainable, which is this is easily explainable by the forms that we see in the other languages here. So I just wanted to put that on your mind, and y'all can. I know it. You know, if you don't have a background in linguistics, this may not make sense initially, but you know, when you come back and revisit this conversation, you know, pause and study this more closely, and you'll see exactly what we mean here. So when we do our regular sound meaning correspondences, you'll see a pattern here, right? So when we mean by regular sound meaning correspondences, we have to show that, you know, a feature, that there's this is regular, meaning that we have, you know, 3 to 5 examples minimum of a particular sound correspondence. So I have here to help you out what I'm mapping here. So the ancient Egyptian R in the second consonant position is corresponding to Yoruba L, right? And so per meaning go forth, in the Yoruba is simply lao, go, foot, vehicle, etc. Peri meaning utterance is Yoruba lo, proclaim, announce. Of course, per, house, in Egyptian is Ile, house. Perej, meaning to separate, is Yoruba latau, separate. And then para, prowess in battle, might. Le, might, strong, hard. And then we have per, field, which is aye, field. And we can tell by this double A here that there was a loss of a consonant. And we can see here that the R that is that or the liquid here is what became Y. Right. So that's why it's Y. So it's kind of the same thing which you see here. And so even in Yoruba, R and L's interchange between dialects. So there may be other dialects that have R instead of L. I need to investigate that further. But notice this last line here, right? Peret, morning, in terms of a noun. And then ofao, mourning, funeral. So in these examples that we see here at the top, the P is lost, or whatever sound in the Yoruba that represents that P, because Yoruba doesn't, well, Yoruba is now developing a P sound, but it's kpa, kpa. It's a voiceless labial velar sound, and we'll get to that in a little later so that y'all could see it. But we can see here that there was something was going on. So the position of the stress in the syllable structure of Yoruba, the first consonant in the consonant vowel structure here, the first consonant vowel syllable was lost. So that's why we're only left with lo, go, lo, proclaim, ile, house, right? But in this form here, the P remains, but the R is dropped and the T suffix is dropped in Yoruba. So, but I only have one example here. So so we got to prove this here. So let's now go to this second sample. So now in the first consonant position, we see where there is a P in Egyptian, which we call chikam, there's an F here. And where there's an N, for example, this is a partial reduplication, penin to scatter, is phone, to scatter. Right? Penet, squeeze, knead, bread, squeeze, and tight. Right? And so this one, the intestines, needs a little bit of explaining, because this nasalized uvular trill, if it remains a nasalized uvular trill, this usually corresponds to 0, or it doesn't have a correspondence in Yoruba unless this turns into an N. If this nasalized uvular trill became an N, then it remains in the Yoruba. Or this could be the case where this N, which is prefixed here, is it's the inverse. So that's also a possibility that this N, and the reason why this N became N here is because it probably throughout its history, we call this regressive assimilation. So this nasalized uvular trill, which is an R type sound, became fully nasal in the presence of this nasal that was in the beginning of the word here. And that's why in Yoruba it still remains. But in any other example, this is usually lost in Yoruba, and we'll see. So this is why we can say that peret, mourning, and alfao, mourning, funeral, is these are cognates, because we can show, because we always have to have 3 or more examples, the regular meaning correspondences. So in this set of Yoruba words, the first syllable was dropped. But in this set, at the bottom here, and in these, the syllables remain, in terms of if it was nasalized, but we can see that the P corresponds in the P in ancient Egyptian corresponds to the F in Yoruba regularly here. So now, how is the word so-called related to Yoruba Ife, right? So we're going to do that right now, right? So again, the so-called and Ife, they don't sound alike, but it's not about sounding alike. It's about regular sound meaning correspondences. And, the establishment, for example, of sound meaning correspondences like this detail historical relationship. That means that the Yoruba people and language and the ancient Egyptian people and language derive from the same ancestor, right? So this is why it's important to have these conversations, because they can't get around this, right? And so just a note, so remember that nasalized uvula trill, that's this symbol here. I told you that most of the time it is dropped. So that F is going to correspond with this sign right here, because this is dropped in, especially in the second syllable in Yoruba. And so this is the sign of, this is the hieroglyphic sign, this is the transliteration, this is the IPA sign that they use to transcribe whatever sound that was in the ancient Egyptian language. But just to give y'all a name for this, every time we see it, we're going to say the voiced pharyngeal fricative. But it may not have been a voiced pharyngeal fricative, right? But that is just the sign that we use in the IPA for this sound. But again, they're always Semitic centric. So because this sound exists in Semitic, they believe that this existed in ancient Egyptian. And so we won't get into that right now. That's a more advanced conversation. But I just wanted to give y'all that background. So that symbol here, let's look at some regular sound meaning correspondences between Egyptian and the Yoruba language. So notice that, Egyptian has another word for house, and it's also region and aside, and that's that so-called voice pharyngeal fricative here by itself. And it corresponds to Yoruba ikpo, place, room, situation, right? Because the same word for house is also the same word for place. The h sound, pole and shaft, corresponds to Yoruba akpa, opo, or ofa, pole and shaft. So notice in this correspondence here that in Yoruba, the pa, that's this simultaneously articulated double consonant here. So this isn't like kapow. There's no vowel in between the K and the P. This is pa, kpa. So somebody who speaks Yoruba can better articulate this than I. I'm not a native speaker of Yoruba, but that you put these together, it's pa, it's one sound. So that's why this singular glyph corresponds to these two sounds, because this is a one singular sound. So ikpo, place, room, situation. And this word for pole and shaft is alpa, opo, and alpha, right? And so we can see that the p, p, f sounds, that these are all allophones of each other. So this is going to be important. This word for arm and hand in the ancient Egyptian, akpa, arm, department, side, wing. right? The h, trace, track, akpa, mark, sign, trace, scare, impression. Excuse me, or scar. It may be scar. No, it should be scar, not scare. Ikpa, track, way, course, right? So it has the same meanings that we see here. And of course, this variant here, portion, piece, akpa, a part, which is a synonym for portion or a piece, a part of. So we can see that this correspondence is regular. And so as a result of this, then we should have some words with this symbol in it on the left-hand side, the voice pharyngeal fricative, that also corresponds to simply F in ancient Egyptian, right? And this is exactly what we see here. So we have this ihi, this is a partial reduplication here. And so meaning to wash, and then foul, Yoruba, to wash. Remember that the nasalized uvular trill is dropped in Yoruba. So they just remains foul, to speak. Like when you say afoshe, potent speech comes from this verb here, fo, to speak. Sorry. And, this is to speak, to gibber, to speak a foreign language, interpret, etc., etc. This word here, harit, hinder part, hind quarter, anus, furo, anus, right? And you can see that the R still corresponds with the R here in Yoruba. So as I said earlier, I didn't put all of the examples, but Egyptian R also corresponds to Yoruba R, but in Egyptian R also corresponds, as we see here, to Yoruba L, right? So there's commentary, there's evidence, for the interchange of these two. So we will continue. Oh no, wasn't on that side. So you can see here. So now notice this last row here. So this is how we know that the fe in Ife, fe meaning widen, enlarge, fe wide, fife, you see the partial, the reduplication here, wide, expansion, broad, width, is cognate with the word so-called, meaning big, large, and then this is the causative, form, to enlarge, to increase, to make great, because this word means big, large, great. And the same thing here, wide, enlarge, wide, expansion, broad, width. And so these are the same words. So this is how you prove that when we say, for example, Ile-Ife, it is cognate with the word per because of the regular sound meaning correspondences that we see between these terms. And so this is one of those situations where demonstration beats conversation. And so you always gotta have this in your mind. So anybody trying to talk about that there's no connection, for example, of the ancient Egyptian with West African people in Yoruba, it is BS. And this is how you beat them up, and we can see that glyph, the so-called voice pharyngeal fricative, corresponds also even with Proto-Bantu P. And so this is Proto-Great Lakes Bantu, and you can see these examples here. All right, and so we can see that P becomes H. And so what this evidence shows us is that more than likely this actual sound was probably a P sound that we see here, right? And it went through its evolution in Egyptian in a different way. And, so, I don't want to get too deep there to kind of throw us off. But this is why we can't, trust, for example, Egyptologists who haven't done any comparative work when they try to make these connections, especially with Semitic and Berber, because it's never based on regular sound meaning correspondences, but they want to They want to look at you crazy because you're doing the scientific work here, the mathematical work, and they can't reduplicate this on a Semitic or Berber end, because this indicates that the Yoruba and the ancient Egyptian are closely related people. So now, if you are trying to argue that the Egyptians were some Mediterranean people, right? How do you, but it's not related to the quote unquote sub-Saharan Black African. How do you explain these correspondences? It only makes sense, given the direction of the out of Africa, that it was the dark Black Africans who moved and settled into the now and moved out of Africa, which is why the ancient Egyptians have this language, because that's who they were, right? But that's another conversation for a different day. And so, but we can also argue that this symbol was actually developed from a labialized K, or a labialized velar, voiceless velar, right? So that qu can become kp. And so it's this qu that becomes this, right? So, more work would have to be done, but this is my reconstruction based on these two correspondences, right? Now, as I argued in the Race and Identity of Ancient Egypt text, the word Pharaoh is they say it comes from the word Per, meaning great house, but it's also possible that it comes from Perha, meaning a hero. It's a variant of this word for a ferocious bull, somebody who is courageous like a bull, someone with great strength. And I won't go into discussion here, but it is discussed in the text, because when you look at the word for Pharaoh, for example, there's no indication. I have to scroll up. There's no indication that when this is attached to a human being, that it has anything to do with a palace or whatnot. So this it just could be talking about the great bull, and you see a lot of bull symbolism, and so there could be a play on words, and so that's an ongoing research project. But I did put that argument in the Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt text, but just to show, again, like when you're having these arguments with these individuals, you don't argue from the stance of race, right? Because with Egypt being in a location where and of a civilization that was a center of trade between three continents, you're bound to have an influx of foreigners, especially in those areas where in the Middle East where there was large droughts and people were looking for water. So when they found their way in the delta and found the Nile River, they came into Egypt and assimilated into ancient Egyptian culture. And then that brings about a different conversation on the nature of admixture, time periods, and you don't want to get into that argument with a bunch of folks who haven't studied this stuff very seriously, and because they try to use the fact that ancient Egypt, had foreigners in for a very long period, that ancient Egyptian society is the result. All of the major things that you like about ancient Egypt is the result of these foreigners coming in and settling in ancient Egypt and quote unquote developing ancient Egyptian civilization. And that's far from the case, because this is why the African centered conversation is important, because they're using all of the aspects of African culture and terms for the very basic things of their society. So even when you're looking at different words for king, right? Like this word here. So we're introduced to these brass and bronze cast statues and like in heads earlier, right? So this is of a king, and one of the names, a modern word for a king in Yoruba is Oba, right? But they have different words for what we would translate in the English language as king. And so one of those words is Oni, right? And this Oni, which is the king of Ife, which we're talking about, Ile-Ife, is cognate with this word gente, meaning foremost or in the front, right? And remember, I told you there's always regular sound meaning correspondences. And so we're looking at, just to explain this table that you're seeing here. So on the left, of course, is the Yoruba language. And on the right and center are two forms of the same word in the ancient Egyptian language. And so just like as what we saw in the earlier, where when we're dealing with Ile, how like for example, the first syllable is dropped, right? Or in the case of the nasalized uvula trill, like we see here in the word for, and this may not be the best example, but definitely when we're looking at, for example, these words here, like ah meaning big, and then to speak, to gibber, right? The loss of the nasalized uvula trill. The Yoruba language, just as Lilias Holmberger told us, the syllables, whether it's the first syllable or the second syllable, something's going on regarding the location of the stress where these syllables were being dropped, either the first syllable or the second syllable. And so it could be confusing for those who are don't have that background. But in this case here, any of the H type sounds in the ancient Egyptian language, that's the H with the loop under it, or the dotted H as we see here, or the H with the underline here. These are three different types of glottal fricative sounds, right? In the, or at least the symbols that are used, because they believe it's three quote unquote glottal type sounds. So for the lay person, we don't know what that means, right? Or how these are pronounced, but we know because they're different glyphs that they're used um, to represent different sounds. But so let's just deal with the first line here first. So this word kenti, foremost in the front, and it's used, for example, in this phrase kenti abeju, or king of Abydos, or Abju, right? And so you'll see that it corresponds. There's a regular correspondence between this H with the loop under it, the dotted H, and a H with the line under it, as well as sh, because sh and this interchanges, and sh and ch interchange. So if you have my text, you know, and you've read significantly through it, you've seen the proof of this. So I just refer you to that text, especially in Appendix A, where I have all my correspondence tables, the internal correspondences as well as the external with Egyptian, right? So we can see how this word for front also can mean chief in the Egyptian language. So it's the same thing here. When you say uni, it's the one that's in front, or the king. But this is especially the title of a king of Ife, right? And in artistry through speech, chen, speech, utterance, matter. So you can see that this is dropped in Yoruba, this sound here. And ona, artistic ability, artistic design, is inu. And you'll learn from the race and identity text that the K sound, for which all of these derive, also became dotted. The I or the J, depending on your transliteration system, right? And we see the correspondence to gente, meaning statue, chenet, meaning craft, all dealing, different variations with the art. So because the different vowels, it made these different sound changes. So, when you say oni for crocodile, gente, crocodile is Seth, shini, crocodile. Remember that these two interchange. So we're dealing with different dialects and or languages in ancient Egypt. So even when you say any, meaning person. This is the word that's cognate with the word Ankh in the Egyptian language, right? And therein, remember, this is dropped. So you're just left with the end. So Eni, Ankh, right? Ona, to approach, doesn't have this variant, but hen, to approach, to touch, to tread on, to come by, to possess, etc. Right? And in this case here, the H is dropped. On the last one, this word meaning yes, but the nasalized uvular trill was fully nasalized, and that's why it survives in Yoruba. Otherwise, it would just be meaning yes. Right. So this is how you prove. So again, if the ancient Egyptians weren't connected, for example, to West Africa, you wouldn't. Why are the ancient Egyptians using West African terms for king? So not only is Ile-Ife cognate with the word Per, meaning great house, but we have the words for king and other words here, and these are regular sound meaning correspondences, so they can't get around this, right? And so this is just like how we see in Yoruba land when it becomes the Oni, the foremost of. You see that in the ancient Egyptian language. So this is from the TLA, and I just wanted to, y'all can screenshot this if you want, just showing you that they use this Henti Heru for example, the foremost of Edfu, Henti Chinet, the foremost of, Chinet, right? Henti Jedu, the foremost of Jedu. Speaking of Osiris, these are, usually names for kings and gods, who are the heads or the leaders of that. So even here, Ra or Gentiu Per, overseer of those of the foremost in the palace. So just like how this would be the Oni of Ife, right? So this is king of Ife, the Oni of Ife. This is the Per or the Genti Per, right? So like these terms are connected. You just have to know how to do the proofs. So I I just found this to be a fly logo, so I put it up here. This is an actual organization, but Omo Oduduwa Yoruba, and that's it for the presentation. So I told you it wasn't that long. Here is some more like I'll just go through. So this was a previous discussion, but like even when it comes to the duat, right? As I showed before, even the duat is found among the Yoruba, which is Orun, right? And I did a little short video on the correspondences between Egypt and Yoruba with this phrase Durba. Excuse me, Dua or Dure. And so this is why it's important to do these correspondences, because they can't get around this. And this picture of Orun, this is a picture of the Duat, and of course Osiris being the king of the Duat. And so I won't bog y'all down with this since we've already dealt with that before. But matter of fact, here's a different variation of what we just talked about here. So how Dimi, town, quarter of a town, landing place, wharf, is also cognate with Ilu, town, Ile, land, house, etc. Ire, mud, Ibidan dialect, right? Dealing with the ground. Like there's so many different correspondences. And I should note that this is, I don't have the time to really go into it, but this is like if I just did a book on the different languages that were spoken in ancient Egypt that were related, like and the proof that these are different languages, this would be one of them. And so I call it a function test. Like, does this one word in, for example, in Yoruba only correspond to one form and word in Egyptian? If so, then the Yoruba is a function of this form in Egyptian. But if not, then it's not a function. That means that the domain corresponds to two or more forms in the range. But I won't get into that. That's the mathematics of this. But like, this is a very, very good exercise in demonstrating the nature and the character of ancient Egypt. So I'll stop there, and I will open up. Actually, we got a little time. I'll stay on until 8 o'clock. So that's another 35 minutes or so. So if you want to join the conversation, you have any questions and the like, I'm dropping the panel link, or the link to the panel, in the chat, and boom, and I will also link it at the top for the folks who are on what you call it. Can I get this? No, I don't want to give a heart. There we go. So I'm pinning it to the top. So if you want to join the panel and have a discussion, or if you have any questions or whatnot, click the link that is on the right. And I know it's going to be a second until y'all get the what I just said, because of the time lapse. But while we wait on y'all to make a decision, here's a good commercial for you.
Yeah. Tokyo wanna those that. What's up? Feeling like I dropped the draw for and caught Uno. Came to kick the door with the game in judo. Pin game low, that's why they give me kudos. Inspired by the 3-0. 595, check it for pimp life. Hit the turnpike, slide to a baseline. Gotta sound like I just hit the 8-5. Oh, I'm so ready, by enemies necessary. We gon' be legendary, hold up. About to grow the payrolls. If you see the vision and you're with it, you should say so. Cause we about building, elevating the millions.
That's right. If you haven't gotten your copy, make sure that you go to asarimhotep.com and get your copy today. And, your support is greatly appreciated. I put a lot of work into this text, and it goes beyond what the title is. And, that this book here is a lesson in what we was just talking about. And so I'm trying to show y'all how to make the proofs, so we can argue differently than what we've been arguing in the past. And so linguistics is a very good tool. And so we have 42 who has joined the panel, and peace and blessings. Of course, Donnie Williams, it was peer reviewed. I always have peers to review. As a matter of fact, there's an aspect of the peer review. Matter of fact, let me add this banner here. So for those of you who are on the Patreon, for example, you should already know, because the video, the interview was already up, but I just finished interviewing. Let me get that out of the way. Dr. John Paulus, PhD. He is an expert in the Greek literature and philosophy. And, he didn't review the work or aspects of the work, before the book was published. But when we met, I had him to read a particular a section, and he reaffirmed what the other reviewers who were reviewing that section had agreed to, which is labeled in the book itself. So if you are on Patreon, do I have that link for the Patreon? Yep. This is the Patreon. You can currently see the interview that I have with Dr. John Paulus, who from the Oriental Institute in Chicago, who and we discuss the Plutarch and his commentary on the section of Plutarch where many scholars believe that he was talking about the word kemet being related to the black of the eye. And so I put forth an argument in the race and identity text, and which is of course this text here, and that text debunks that argument that folks have been making. So once I went into the primary Greek, and and I had the arguments reviewed by actual scholars of Greek literature and philosophy and Greek language, and you can see the results in the race and identity. And speaking of peer reviewed, and I'll get right back to you, because this brother seems to come in the chat all the time as if I don't have multiple peer-reviewed texts. And so the latest peer-reviewed, and actually I'm also working on a journal article on Osiris, and I've been asked to submit it to this journal, and we'll discuss that a little later. But let me pull up the text here. So just to show my screen, we'll do that, right? So this is the latest article that has come out, peer-reviewed article, and this is the Senegalese review, the Senegalese Review of History. This is it's a French publication, and it's a special edition dealing with the religion and identity of sub-Saharan Africa from prehistory till today, right, or to our day, right? And so this is number 12. So this is my article that's in the text. So I'll scroll. And so, of course, those of you who are part of the Patreon, you have access to this text already because I gave it to you. But this is a peer-reviewed text. And, here's the scientific committee, everybody that's involved, all these professors and these African universities. Here's the editorial staff that you can see. And here's just more. And here's a lot of the articles that is in. So it's published by La Harmattan, a very well-known publication house. And here's my article here, starting on page 37. So from page 37 to 94. So that, think about how long that is. So the re-examining of the divine from an Egypto-Bantu lens, a linguistic and cultural analysis of the word nature. And I think mine and Dr. Issa and Dr. Salam Faraji are the only English speaking articles or English written articles in this, and the rest are in French. So this is the temple in ancient Egypt, right? And then the religious foundation and political power in ancient Egypt. Sacred. There's one here that that I'm looking forward to reading. It has to deal with temples in Asia and the like. And I want to read this one too. This looks like a good one. But and the libation vases, and dealing with ancient Egypt and Ngamba of Cameroon. So this is some archaeological stuff here. So you always have to hush folks up, when they don't know anything about you. And there's some other articles that are coming out soon, and I'll be quiet about those because you can't keep proving to folks all the time that you do this for real in real life. And so, but anyway, so that's the latest text. So if you are a part of the Patreon group, this is in the Patreon for you. Otherwise you have to pay for the entire text to get, saying the article. But I will stop there, and again, welcome our good brother 40 to the conversation. What's good brother?
Thanks for having me. How am I coming in? Because I've never used this mic before.
You coming in good. I can hear you well.
All right. Yeah, I just plugged in something I found on the floor. I'm like, I know I have a mic somewhere, and then I found it. Let's see. The question I had, it's related to Igbo, and I'm just wondering if you see any similarities to like languages that are close to Yoruba, and by proxy have similar correspondence with Egyptian. Because I remember you're really critical about Catherine, I think her name was Uchuladu's work.
Correct.
And but I'm wondering if like she got some things right. You're like, yeah, it does kind of correspond too.
Yeah, with Ochelano, no, it's like people there are people who have studies in like literature, right? And they'll say that they have degrees in linguistics, and of course I don't have a degree in historical comparative linguistics. My linguistics is in applied linguistics as it regards to computer sciences and languages. So I study formal languages. That means coding and mathematical languages and logic. And then I apply that with my studies in historical comparative linguistics, right? But her dealing with literature, she tries to equate that into linguistic studies, and she never does any kind of comparisons between the languages using regular sound meaning correspondences, which is the standard methodological process for establishing a relationship. And she thinks that the Igbo is the origin of all the great African civilizations and even beyond. So the Sumerians were Igbos, the ancient Egyptians were Igbos, some other folks in Europe, originally came from Igbos, and it's like, no, we can't do that. So I just can't take her. She interests me at first, but the more and more I started learning and stuff, the more I can't take them serious. The more I can't take her serious. And people like her who is just so centric, like and this you find this all across Africa when certain Africans start seeing similarities between the ancient Egyptians and their language and culture, they'll swear to God that the ancient Egyptians came from them, and the other people in the world, everybody. That's why like Ile-Ife believes that all human beings came out of Ile-Ife. And you'll find some folks who understand it as myth, but there's a lot of folks in Yoruba land that swear to God that that's factual history, that all human beings come out of Ile-Ife. And it's just crazy.
That was mostly what I was curious about. That and just if you've heard anything with Sumerian, because I think I had talked to you about this before. How it's like you had, I think, Willibog Wagner, and then you had G.K. Campbell Dunn do like an entire dictionary with African languages and Sumerian,
Hmm.
and and that's still just ignored completely. Like you will see none of that on Wikipedia. So I'm wondering if like if anyone's brought up how well, at the very least there seems to be like some blinders in making any progress with African languages. It's like, nah, just shut up and stick to Greenberg and that's it. And that's problematic because and then also this kind of related to that, is there any progress with the blinders saying, well, you can't do comparative linguistics with anything outside of Afroasiatic because they're too far away? So even if you
You know,
do it, you're doing something that's broken.
I have, um, I try to tell folks that academia is just like the presidential politics. It's political. And, people thinking that, scholarship is objective and, people all simply go with the evidence. And I see you, Abasi, and we'll get to you in a second. And thanks for, coming on. But um, people think that it's all objective, and uh, the everybody has put away their biases, and there's just nothing else involved, and that is far from the case. And so it's just like if you have just in governmental politics here in the United States, of course, we have the Democratic and the Republican Party, but you also have the Green Party, the independents, and they're all fighting and vying for the same seats. And so, if you, for example, like I submitted a journal article to this one journal, and it was rejected. And when they rejected it, they couldn't falsify my arguments because my arguments were solid. They made the argument, the reason why they rejected is because I was comparing ancient Egyptian to quote unquote Niger Congo. And in their mind, you can't do that. But when you go down, like when I show my tables, like I show the tables in the presentations, there's no marks, there's no comments on them because you can't comment. I'm showing you what it is. I'm mapping them correctly. I'm showing you the sound correspondences with the probable sound laws in terms of the vowels and why these sound changes and the like. You can't deal with that on a surface level. So instead of admitting that these are valid comparisons, you just summarily dismiss it and say that you can't compare the ancient Egyptian, for example, with Yoruba and Chiluba. And you got to deal with this, because I come from a science background, so demonstration beats conversation. And for individuals like this, they don't have that background, so there's a lot of politics involved. And you got to constantly remind laypersons who aren't involved in these academic discourses on why that is. That's why it took damn near 20 years for Shekinah Joke, for example, to get his PhD, because they were hating. They were just summarily just dismissing them, like, just they haven't made up in their mind the conclusion. And anything contrary to that, they just summarily dismiss it. And and again, this is liberal arts, so it's not, they don't deal with science like we would do in physics, for example, or logic like we would do with mathematics that requires a certain level of rigor that a lot of people in the social sciences or social, studies are not, used to, right? And so they think that just because somebody is of note and has said it, that automatically makes it valid and true. You have to be able to, you have to disprove, arguments in the same way with the same rigor that you would use to prove an argument. So nobody can just come and say, well, you're wrong. Well, show me how I'm wrong. Falsify my correspondences. Once you make them have to do work, then it becomes a problem. But before I go back to you, want to bring in Abasi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which I'm probably not. But welcome to the Mbongi.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Happy to have this conversation and hear about your views on African linguistics. I've been hearing a lot about you in particular, asarimhotep, from a number of supporters that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited, actually, to speak in this live.
Indeed, indeed. Well, let me start sharing my screen there. You come up bigger. And yeah, so what's on your mind?
So what's on my mind is that I'm a very critical person when it comes to African linguistics, and I like to always delve deep into the even sub branches of established language families. And I've noticed a lot of people talk about this hypothetical language family known as Negro Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very, very critical of that particular language family. And I'm very, very critical of its how can I say, validity, is cohesiveness. Because in my eyes, I don't see a strong phonological connection between the languages. I don't see a strong morphological connection between the different branches, and obviously the two main branches of Negro Egyptian. I don't see a strong connection between the sub branches in Negro Egyptian as compared to the other established language families known as, or which include some of the languages within Negro Egyptian, such as Niger Congo, particularly Atlantic Congo, Nilo-Saharan, particularly Eastern Sudanic, and obviously Afro-Asiatic, with not too many issues within that language family, except from Omotic. So that's why I'm very critical of Negro Egyptian. I'm trying to remember the two main branches in that language family, but it was something along the lines of um, I can't remember. But if it comes back to me, I'll talk about it. But yeah, I'm always told that the source materials is in French. I've tried to check out a little bit, and still I don't see that cohesive element when it comes to it. I've heard that there's been reconstructions when it came to Negro Egyptian. Uh, I've been trying to look for it for the source material, but yeah, I mean, I've heard that you're a proponent of this particular language family, so, and I've heard that you also are knowledgeable on it, and so I want to have a debate, if we can call it that.
Alrighty, no problem. Let me. So there's a how should I say? And I'm probably going to. I'm gonna open up because I deal with this in as well in my text Ujima Volume 2. But I'm just going to deal with one issue here, right? and I come across individuals such as yourself who may not be convinced, but I always have to, ask to what degree are you familiar with the literature and works, first and foremost, in the Greenberg School and in the African school, in the Diopian school, as we would call it, right? In regards to methods, issues, and the like. And not only that, and of course, your understanding of how historical comparative linguistics is actually conducted. And the nature of that is beyond the scope of what we can cover here. But I just wanted to give one example of why uh, we have problems here. So you said yourself that you don't see the kinds of connections in Negro Egyptian, which I'm not sure to what degree you've actually studied this text, but let's just assume that you are correct, right, in your analysis and your hypothesis. That you don't see the kinds of connections in Negro Egyptian that you find amongst Niger Congo languages, for example. But when you read the actual literature by even the people who are proponents of these Greenbergian phyla, they all are in disagreement with the nature of even if these relationships exist, right? So, for example, when I'm addressing Dr. Capo Chichi, this is my text, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards an Etymology of the Place Name Kemet, right? And I'm addressing something here that Capo Chichi states in terms of the etymology of Kemet as meaning black is acknowledged by the great majority of Egyptologists who define it either as a reference to the black color of the Nile silt or to that of the skin color of the ancient Egyptians. This latter meaning is mainly acknowledged by Egyptologists and other researchers of black African descent, right? So we're dealing with this whole issue of the etymology of the place name Kemet, right? So I come behind him and I say, the question then becomes, which one of these Egyptologists has ever completed a full etymological study on the word Kemet to come to this conclusion? Just because something is accepted by a great majority, notice real statistics are never offered, of scholars doesn't mean that the argument is true, because it may have yet to be proved by the actual experiments or the data, what we call in logic the begging the question logical fallacy. We are reminded of the words by R.M.W. Dixon, who's a historical comparative linguist who primarily deals with Australian languages, but is very well known in linguistic circles, concerning the methodological lackness of Africanist linguists. These are your linguists who adhere to Afroasiatic, Khoisan, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, etc. In the text, Aerial Diffusion and Genetic Inheritance, Problems in Comparative Linguistics, edited by Alexandra Ockenwald. So starting on page 21, going into page 23. And hopefully I can make this bigger so that y'all can see. Hopefully y'all can see this well. Can y'all see this very well?
Right. Yeah, I can see it, yeah.
I can see it.
So this is in the introduction. He says, discussing work on African languages. Dixon, because they're naming and discussing what each contributor, because it's an edited text, so what each contributor discusses in the actual text itself. So this is in the introduction, and then each individual chapter is by a different author. Right. So discussing work on African languages. Dixon, 1997, 21 to page 23. My bad. That's of that text of the 1993. So the pages that we're dealing with here is on page 8 of the 2001 text. So let's go back up. So now, Discussing work on African languages, Dixon states, after reviewing the available literature, an outsider is forced to conclude that the idea of genetic relationship and the term language family, notice that they're in quotes, they're his quotes, not mine, are used in quite different ways by Africanists and by scholars working on languages from other parts of the world. Both Demendal in chapter 13 and Hein and Kuteva in chapter 14 present the received opinion that there are in Africa 4 major language families. Again, also in quotes, or genetically defined units: Niger, Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afroasiatic, and Khoisan. In fact, Khoisan is regarded by those scholars who have studied it in most detail as a linguistic area consisting of several distinct genetic families. See, among others, whatever. Afroasiatic does appear to be one genetic unit, although full justification for this has yet to be published in integrated form. And there's others that just say this flat out doesn't exist, and even some stuff that came out in 2023. And I wish I had the book in front of me, and I can go to that. There are wide divergences of opinion concerning the status of Nilo-Saharan. For Niger Congo, all we can say is that there has so far been no principled justification for this as a language family. As Demendal states in his section 3 of that same text, by the criteria of regular sound correspondences. If I don't know what part of the conversation you came in on this particular show, but I kept emphasizing and re-emphasizing the standard in historical comparative linguistics is the establishment of regular sound meaning correspondences. That's how you establish families. So let me go back. It's Demendal, and this is Demendal has written a book on African languages, and he's an adherent to the so-called Afroasiatic and Niger-Congo languages, but he actually says there's more language families, and a lot of them are isolates, but you have to get the book to, and I can get the name of that book that he wrote on African languages, but you know, he's a large name in the field, right? So he's telling you this, not as, you know, an outsider. As Demendal states, by the criteria of regular sound correspondences among these languages and of the reconstruction of protoforms, Niger-Congo is not a proven genetic unity. It may well be that, as Hein and Kuteva say, Greenberg's genetic classification of African languages by now widely accepted, but being widely accepted, for example, among Afrikaners, does not equate with has been scientifically justified. And when I keep saying this, people think that I'm speaking out of my ass, that there's no such thing as Niger-Congo. It has not been established. It's the same thing, the same methods that they use for Niger-Congo, they use for Afroasiatic. Afroasiatic is not an established language family. It's not a genetic unity, right? So, and people think just because you repeat it a lot of times that somehow is going to force you to force everybody to bypass the proof part of this scientific endeavor. So just because something is widely accepted doesn't mean that it has been scientifically justified. In Niger-Congo, as stated here by one of the top of the Afrikanist linguists, that it has not been genetically established. It's not a proven genetic unit, because all language families are established by the criteria of regular sound correspondences. At the end of section 1, we quoted Dench's methodological principle that only after all other possible explanations for the shared features have been exhausted should they be taken to be a genetic inheritance. The opposite procedure appears to have been followed by Afrikaners. At a first stage, every sort of resemblance was taken as indicative of a genetic connection. Many of these are, in fact, typological or areal similarities. These aren't Afrocentrics. These aren't quote unquote black biased Africans. These are white boys saying this about other white boys. who do this work. So who am I supposed to believe in this conversation? Somebody who I know and have studied and gotten their works and even had correspondences with regarding Niger Congo, or you, because you believe that, Niger Congo has some established, some things that you can that you agree with. And I see that he fell out, so there he is. He's back again. So there is no such thing as a Niger Congo. This has not been established using all the scientific criteria that is needed to do. So when people come with these disagreements, you have to demonstrate and show. Abinga has written a text, and Mboli has written a text. There are other authors, all qualified in these areas, who have written texts. Have you read these texts? Have you done your own correspondence work? Because as I stated before, in order to disagree with something, you have to falsify it. You just can't have an opinion. That's not how scholarship works. Your opinion means nothing. So again, who am I to believe? You who have an opinion on, these established relationships that you see, or the experts who study this and say there's no genetic relationship between these languages that we're calling, for example, Niger Congo. And see, when people are in disagreement with me, they don't bring up these conversations. They don't bring these source material because they never read it. They don't study this stuff in real life. Matter of fact, let me find, because I'm going to show you another one where one of the top Afroasiatic linguists and scholars will tell you in his own words that Afroasiatic is not a genetic family. It's an areal. It's just it's a language area where people have similar features because they've been interacting with each other for thousands of years. So, matter of fact, I'm gonna find that source because I put it in Umoja, volume 2. See, this is what people miss when they want to summarily dismiss works without reading them. So let me find this real quick. Let me go to the books. Umoja volume 2. And that's the intro. Where is it at the top? There we go. So let me see if it changes. Okay, good. It changes there. So let's go to the source, because I have a whole chapter dedicated to the non-existence of these language family, and I'm just certain, because Black people for some reason don't believe other Black people, qualified Black people, when we say stuff, but they only believe white boys. So that's all our sources, white folks who do this work.
Nah, it's not really race-based.
I'm not saying you
At
in
least-
particular. I'm just saying in general. This is my experience. Believe me when I say.
Fair enough. But
as a matter of fact, in a conversation with Sheffrin from Pseudo Killers, I said, if we have an equally qualified Black scholar and an equally qualified white scholar, no difference in their credentials and abilities, who would you pick if they made opposite conclusions or even the same conclusion? And he just flat out said the white boy. And this is Sheffrin.
yeah, clearly that's not logical. It's not a logical statement, but yeah, I wanted to reply to what you were saying earlier, when we were talking about opinions and language families. I just stated that I see more validity within Niger Congo, particularly Atlantic Congo, particularly. That's what I prefaced. Afroasiatic with some, question of Omotic, obviously, and Nilo-Saharan, particularly Eastern Sudanic, right? I specified those sub branches within Nilo-Saharan and Niger Congo, and the majority of linguists who who study, in particular, African languages and Niger Congo languages agree or state that the validity of Atlantic Congo languages, which includes Bantu languages, which includes obviously Bwene Congo languages, which includes some of those other smaller branches like Mel and Sua and all of those other ones, is a standard, is valid, and not a lot of linguists would disagree with that. However, if we take a look at, for example, the Negro Egyptian classification, you have languages which are classified as Atlantic Congo, being split up into different branches of, I found it again, it's called the Bere branch, which includes languages such as Hausa, Azande, Mande, and there's also Bantu languages within that. Then you have the second branch, which is the Bir branch, which includes Nuer, Wolof, Somali, Oromo, Sumerian, Coptic, etc., etc. So these are the two main branches of Negro tradition, which you'd obviously know about. And for me, if we were to do a comparison between, like, let's say Mande and Bantu languages, I think it's fair to say that most linguists find little similarities between them. And even when we're looking at Niger Congo languages, upon the Greenbergian theory of Niger Congo languages, most linguists don't agree that there's validity between Mande languages and the rest of Atlantic Congo, let alone specifying it Bantu and between them, and let alone the inclusion of Hausa languages, because Hausa languages have a very stark difference in morphology, phonology, um, vocabulary or slash lexicon, and general syntax compared to Mande and Atlantic Congo languages or Bwene Congo languages and other, what we would say call Niger Congo languages in the region. So to classify them along the same lines, groups that are highly, highly diverse, or from what we can see or what we can extrapolate by looking at the objective data, it's a poor assessment in my view. So that is why I say, looking at the data, looking at the objective data, I can make the conclusion, or I'm of the opinion that there's more validity within Niger Congo than within Negro Egyptian, for example, or Afro-Asiatic than within Negro Egyptian, for example. Um, Even if we're looking at the methodology used to reconstruct or determine the connections behind these languages, because Greenberg isn't the only person to have studied African languages. And we know that there's been succeeding linguists that have looked into these particular language families and they have made conclusions. And generally, if we look at their agreement or assessment of the phylums that Greenberg had established, although they find some sort of points where they can say, oh, there's not really a strong case for the inclusion of this branch of languages in this family. The general phylum of, Niger Congo, Ile-Saharan, Afroasiatic, or back then I guess it was Hemito-Semitic, was agreed upon, is agreed upon by linguists. I think in Afroasiatic in particular, there's a famous linguist, I guess we would call him a Greenbergian, called Militarev, who I've looked at his works on Afroasiatic, and there seems to be a strong case that he makes in terms of when he reconstructs some of the features of Afroasiatic across the sub branches. in terms of its validity there. I know for Niger Congo, although people find contentions with him, there's Robert Bleach, who, particularly for Atlantic Congo, we can say that he makes a strong case for the validity of that particular sub-branch and other branches in Bwene Congo as well, for example. And yeah, that's what I would say. And yeah, you can reply. That's fine.
Okay. See, this is why I have to write and put the source material in textual form so people can really understand what is going on in actual academia. And so again, that's you heard the first citation when it talks about the Africanist. When it says Africanist, they're talking about the African linguists who deal with under the Greenbergian school. So it's not just Greenberg. So like is kind of saying Greenberg is kind of like saying for biology Darwin, right? We know that since Darwin there has been, you know, other biologists and, you know, who have made contributions to, but it's still a branch that starts with him. So it's the same thing with Greenberg, or where you say Newtonian physics, you know, which Einstein would be in, versus, even though Einstein started quantum mechanics, but quantum mechanics is a different, you know, saying branch of folks, right? So when the linguists are, you know, from around the world are examining Greenberg's methods that established these language phyla, everyone around the world has an issue with them, right? And even to the point where it's actually called pseudoscience. So we have, so this is the text that was cited earlier, the 1997 text by Dixon, RMW Dixon, that was cited in that 2001 text by Ockenwald and Dixon, right? So he was referencing this text here. It's called "The Rise and Fall of Languages," and in this on page 35 in the footnote, he says, "For many linguists, such views, for example, pertaining to Greenberg's methods in his Eurasiatic, because he tried to use what he did in Africa with European languages and even Native American languages." And, you know, he got run out of the, you know, the academy with that, because you know, he kept getting proven wrong time and time again. And so so he's responding to that. You know, he says, "For many linguists, such views," talking about Greenberg's, "falls more into the category of religious beliefs than scientifically testable hypotheses, about on par with claims that all languages have the same deep structure." You would have to know Chomsky and you know that you know deep structure, you know, in terms of human languages aspect of linguistics. That's not necessarily historical compared to linguistics. That's just linguistics as a whole, as a phenomenon of Homo sapien development. So that's a different conversation, and which has been proven to be false, right? Many linguists have disproved that the underlying same deep structures that they try to run with. So they've proven that false, and which is why he mentions it here. And the position of the stars at the moment of birth determines our character. So Greenberg's methods and his conclusions is on par with astrology. That you can look on your chart. You know, I'm a Leo allegedly, and you can determine, you know, your life and what is to come based on your birthday. This is unscientific. It is pseudoscience, and that's what he's saying here. And what people keep saying, the majority of, I guarantee you haven't read the vast majority of literature in linguistics and study world languages and comparative linguistics, because they do not agree with Greenberg. Greenberg is considered a pseudoscientist. And So I won't deal with this quote here, but I'm going to jump down to the I'm probably jump back into this one because this is dealing with one of the linguists commenting on Greenberg when he tried to do the same things that he did with African languages with Native American languages, and how they came to the same conclusion as the Indo-Europeanists, that it was pseudoscience. And so so now we're going to jump to Antonio Lopriano. So many of you who deal with Egyptology and language and linguistics may be familiar with this. He wrote the first book on the language and linguistics of the ancient Egyptian, so that you can read. So, but this is his text from in German, and this is what he says. So here's the translation, right? And in view of the present state of research, a comparative grammar of Hamido-Semitic languages, Afroasiatic, goes beyond what is scientifically attainable, even in the sense of an algebraic reconstruction. Our comparisons will therefore have to renounce the traditional historical model diachronic linguistics, and instead will extend the typological approach. And for anybody who knows anything about historical comparative linguistics, you know that typological correspondences are not used in historical comparative linguistics. You can't use typology to establish a language family. So just because this language has labial veilers and this language has labial veilers, that has absolutely nothing to do with their relationship. That's a typological similarity. So that's just like saying that, you know, the people in Philadelphia who are 6'5" and taller are related to the people who are 6'5" and taller in California. Like that's not a way that you group people, right? Outside of the ultimate that all human beings derive from a single source in Africa, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? So here, the overlappings need not necessarily go back to a posited common Afroasiatic, but will rather represent Afroasiatic as a realized construct. Thus, Afroasiatic will never be a reconstructible language because you have to use the comparative method to do reconstructions. Since you can't use the comparative method on Afroasiatic, you can't reconstruct Afroasiatic, which is why, for example, Christopher Ehret's attempt at a reconstruction, as well as Orwell and Stavova, you know, both failed at it because they're trying to use Greenberg's method, right? So this is a person in the Greenberg school. This isn't a crazy Afrocentrist, right? But only the reconstructed sum of historically attested points of linguistic juncture, independent of their origin and carried out for the sake of particular investigation. This sum may be interpreted in terms of genetic relationship, Sprachbund or aerial linguistics, or allogenetic relationship. The results of allogenetic contacts between the Afroasiatic languages will also have to be considered as belonging to the structure of Afroasiatic, just as much as there are the results of a genetic relationship. Afroasiatic can only be considered an abstract construct of linguistic features and not a unified system of linguistic realities. So what he's telling you in this area, you know, using Sprachbund, is that the reason why there's a commonality between these languages is they share features because they've been interacting with each other, a lot of borrowings, and you can only establish these as a particular type and not based upon realities. These are not genetic. It's not a genetic unit, which is why he made this statement in the beginning. It is not a genetic. It is not a historical reality. And so when you talk about Hamido-Semitic, when you try to do the comparative analysis, it goes beyond what is scientifically attainable. You can't demonstrate this scientifically. This is a historical comparative linguistics is a science. So where is this majority of scholars? You have to demonstrate and show. And so this is why we quote, for example, Hine and Nurse on their text that came out in 2000, an introduction into African languages. Language classification must be based on specific points of resemblance and not on the presence or absence of general features of a typological nature. Thus, whether two or more languages are tonal or not, or whether they have an odd number versus an even number of vowels, might be interesting from a typological or areal point of view. See these keywords: typological, areal. Isn't this what he's saying here? Areal linguistics, typology. But in of themselves is irrelevant in the determining of relatedness. So if Afroasiatic, they have typological similarities, but as the linguist stated, and this is a person, and this is Heinen, well, actually that's the editors. Let me get the specific source here. This Paul Newman in the text that was edited by Heinen Nurse on the Introduction to African Languages. It is irrelevant in determining relatedness. This is why I cite this stuff. And you mentioned Roger Blinch earlier, and he's quick to tell you that Bantu is not a language family. Let's read them. This, and I stated here, this is reaffirmed by Roger Blinch in his article, New Developments in the Classification of Bantu Languages and Their Historical Implications. In view of the importance of these proposed changes, it is appropriate to review the methods used to arrive at them. Just as the substantive groupings of languages have changed, methods have not remained static. The evolution of classification techniques is almost as important as the expansion of actual data. Broadly speaking, developments during this century can be characterized as a gradual realization that typological criteria, no matter how persuasive the similarities, the stuff that you was believing in earlier, are not relevant to genetic classification, right? And so in the text on Bantu languages edited by Francis Katamba, in the article Bantu Nominal Morphology, he states, because mechanical systems are typical of Bantu languages, their presence has been used sometimes as a litmus test for membership of the family. This is unfortunate, since having a gender system of any kind is a typological feature that can be acquired. That means borrowed. It is not a trait that proves genetic relationship. Like, this is why I cite all of these, so people can't come sideways. Typology is not used to establish genetic relationships. And as we saw from Antonio Lupriano, that's all Afro, quote unquote, Asiatic is a grouping of similar typology, but it is not a genetic unit. Which is why, for example, the same methods used in Afroasiatic was used in Niger-Congo. And as we read from the issues of Niger-Congo is also not an established genetic unit. It doesn't exist, right? And given that it was on the basis of mass comparison rather than the comparative method that the canon of Afroasiatic languages was established by Greenberg, and although this methodology avoids reliance on topological features, which I disagree, and has, in the present writer's view, come up with the right conclusions, a methodology that does not invoke the rigor of the principles stated in the last paragraph cannot make predictions and so fall short of true theoretical status, meaning the comparative method. Pragmatically, too, it is quite crude, for it incorporates no filter for rejecting unrelated lookalikes, nor any means of recognizing highly dissimilar and albeit cognate items. Right? And So I'm going to skip Obinga there because we don't trust black folks when they say stuff, right? And hold on, because it's this one specific that I want to get to, because Roger Blinch talks about Bantu not being hold on, problem use of green birds linguistics, whereas green birds has been widely and uncritically used by human geneticists. It has been rejected by. So let me read this section. So AMJ Gennett, in his letter to the editor of the journal article, Problematic Use of Green Birds Linguistic Classification of the Americas and the Studies of Native American Genetic Variation, informs us of the dangers of using Greenberg, this is me stating this, when combined with other fields of study that rely on the accuracy and integrity of proposals provided by linguists. And so the author, this here, states, whereas Greenberg's classification has been widely and uncritically used by human geneticists, it has been rejected by virtually all historical linguists who study Native American languages. Because people who do historical comparative linguistics consider what Christopher Arid and Roger Blinch and who's actually an anthropologist, Roger Blinch. His degrees are not in linguistics, and nor is Joseph Greenberg, and neither is Christopher Arid. Greenberg is an anthropologist, and Christopher Arid is a PhD in history. They all use linguistics as a tool, right? So, like, these are the conversations that we have to have. And I just cited this, earlier in the what's the name text. And so this is where Garrett Dimmendahl says, by the criteria, regular sound correspondence is among the languages in the reconstruction of protoforms. Niger-Congo is not a proven genetic unit. You won't be able to prove it, right? And so here's what I wanted to get at, because you mentioned West Atlantic. Like, I know that you're not reading the material, right? So C. Tucker Childs, in his work, An Introduction into African Languages, notes that West Atlantic subfamily of Niger-Congo has never been demonstrated to be an actual language grouping. Yet Afrikaners still write as if West Atlantic has been demonstrated to be a reality. Child goes on to state, child here, the classificatory problems with Atlantic have hardly been resolved, but have rather been abandoned for a non-genetic classification, just like Afroasiatic that we mentioned from Lopriano. The most recent commentary on the group as a whole admits that the classification is not genetic. It's not a real classification. So when you come to me with this West Atlantic, that don't mean jack. It's not a genetic unit. It has not been established by the historical comparative method. And here is Roger Blinch discussing in the work Niger-Congo, an alternative view. He says, Bantu, definitely not a group. This may seem surprising in the light of the published claims to the contrary, but the argument from comparative linguistics, which links the highly diverse languages of Zone A to a genuine reconstruction, is non-existent. Most claim Proto-Bantu is either confined to a particular subgroups or is widely attested outside of Bantu proper. In his other article, The Bantoid Languages, he says, although Bantu has been treated as a genetic unity since the middle of the 19th century, it remains an open question as to whether there is any distinctive boundary between Bantu and the languages related to it. Bantuists continue to defend the integrity of the discipline, but no lexical morphological isoglosses have been established that clearly demarcate Bantu from the closest relatives. Right, and then he continues, the function of the overview is to provide basic information on the geography, classification, and major features of the Bantoid languages. Given that they are numerous, diverse, and presumably a greater antiquity than Indo-European, this implies a certain superficiality. This might seem a controversial statement, but Bantu proper, with its relatively transparent internal relationships at least 4,000 years old, if current archaeology is accepted, Proto-Indo-European is usually treated as 6,000 to 7,000 years old. The lexical and morphological diversity within Bantoid must surely have taken thousands of years to evolve. So he's telling you here that Bantu, according to him, has not been established as as a genetic unit. So I'm wondering where this vast majority of most linguists, notice when people say that they never cite directly, they never cite actual studies. And this is why I cite what I cite in the way that I cite. It puts all of this to rest. And so, I don't just promote my books just because I wrote them. It's because I have the source material in them. But when people try to make these off the cuff arguments, this is what we have to contend with. So this is why and I known all of this for a number of years. And so when I finally read Mboli's work, it was a breath of fresh air, because Mboli did not go by any so-called establishment. He let the actual data speak for itself. And so he goes by individual languages, and he sets up the language family Negro Egyptian from scratch. This was an era in which Obinga, this is what highlights the era that Obinga did in his 1993 work, because he just got rid of Afroasiatic, and he took Berber out of Afroasiatic and made it its own family. Then you had his Negro Egyptian, and then you had Khoisan. But Negro Egyptian is just Niger, Congo, Nilo-Saharan, and the languages left over from the Afroasiatic that he didn't kick out, because he kicked out Semitic. And so Semitic is its own language family that does not originate in Africa, which even new studies has later to confirm that, right? And even in the latest work on Afroasiatic, when someone applied the comparative method between Semitic and ancient Egyptian, they showed that you could not establish a genetic unity and that they were not related, which we've talked about on this program before. And so this is what makes Mboli's work great, is that he started from scratch, and he used the comparative method, the standard method that everyone uses to establish language families around the world. I see you trying to say something, 42.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to throw in a couple questions for both of you. One for Abasi, if I'm pronouncing that right, is are you talking about like Mboli's Negro Egyptian, because you mentioned the Beret branch, or was that something that Mboli got from Obinga?
No, he didn't get that from Obinga. That was the result of the linguistic analysis, again, from scratch. And so he noticed a difference. For example, let me just show something real quick. Hopefully that it'll make it easier for the people to understand. So I'm just doing a quick search of my.
That's kind of what I thought. So that's good, because I'm glad like Abasi is talking about something that's more recent.
Yeah. So hold on one second. I just want to give. Hopefully, I have an example of. So and even his. Well, I gotta, because I have it on. So I'm going to share the whole screen now. I'm gonna have to get out of here soon. So let me get that banner. I guess I could keep it up. Don't matter. So, for example, this is a more updated branching. So you have to kind of read the text. It's not you have to read the text to understand the nature of the Beret branch versus the Behir branch. because this is speaking on the nature of how the words are formed. And so there's a reason for that, because of the presence of, you know, a particular morpheme that was either prefix or suffix in the different branches, and how that in the position of the stress on the syllables or the morphemes themselves, and how they shaped how the words were actually pronounced. And so this was part of, and there's also other isoglosses. For example, like you see this isogloss here. So in this Bere branch, you know, words that had the voiceless velar K and this apical sound here, the T, in between two vowels, they gave you the trill and the R sound. Whereas in other ones, it did it, but you notice the two vowels that are in front of it. For example, this AAK vowel and the AAT, which gave this, versus the vowel, consonant, vowel, like in between two vowels. And like there's another that is not highlighted here because it's a different, it's a different isogloss and model that he shows that I don't show here. So as many of you know who have Ujima Volume 2, I renamed Negro Egyptian to Chiankanda Chikulu as the larger family. But what he called, you know, post-classic Negro Egyptian, that later stage, I called Chiana Intu. And then we, you know, but we kept the same division of Chiana Intu with Bere branch and Beher branch. So for example, this is, you know, the languages that belong to the Bere branch. So we're talking about a consonant vowel structure of the words, versus the same words in these languages, but they're given in the form of consonant, vowel, consonant, right? And, you know, I won't go into that, but you can see, for example, that these words are the word for liver in these languages. So we that word bere is the Zande word meaning liver and also heart, right? And which also doubles in African languages as the word for soul and mind. And this is where you get this word ber from, even in Middle Egyptian, for the so-called ba, or spirit, right? But, and this is part of the discussion that led to the discovery that Coptic is actually a separate language, and not directly an evolution of Middle Egyptian, but that's another conversation. But the word biher is the Somali word for liver, right? And there's a correspondence set that he shows. So like when we see Sumerian bada, bale, liver, you know, Proto-Bantu badi for liver and also heart, just like what we see in the Zande language, right? And then Sango, just like Yoruba, loses the syllables based upon a certain structure. But this is indicative, and we know this, that Sango, even though it's in a monosyllabic form, it's like this because Sango doesn't have diphthongs. And diphthongs, like we see in the Nuer language, like we see in Wolof oftentimes, and like what we see in Coptic, is indicative of this particular feature. So this is a very detailed analysis, which we don't have time to go into. And I wish, so like here's, like this is a good example, like between the Zerma language, which is Songhai, versus Zande, right? And so this word for skin, and these are all based on regular sound meaning correspondences. So even if they don't look like they look alike, we've established them these based on regular sound meaning correspondences. So they would say kuuru, meaning skin, but poto, meaning skin. So remember this simultaneous labiovelar here. So this is one sound, po, just like in the Yoruba language. And so the other isogloss that he discovered is, you know, while Certain of the branches will have that K and a T. In between two vowels, it will still remain K and T, like in the Zande language. But in languages like Zerma, they will turn into either the R or the nasalized uvular trill, which is a type of R sound. So, but we won't have time to go there. But that bere, meaning big, you can see the two vowels. And so this final vowel is a recent innovation in the Zerma language, but it's bir, meaning big, whereas ur or wara, which was reduced in Zande. And it's the same thing even in Egyptian. It's a WR. And W, M, and B. Excuse me, M and B in ancient Egyptian and a lot of the Negro Egyptian languages also become W. Bori, meaning good and beautiful. And biri. So you see the double vowel and long vowel in these cases here versus the consonant vowel here. So, even though this has vowels at the end, this was added later on. This is a new innovation and probably the loss of the consonant of a suffix, right? But you see the different forms here. Consonant, vowel, consonant, whereas Zande is consonant, vowel. Like, it's very detailed in how you can tell these different things. But you can only establish this by regular sound meaning correspondences in the comparative method. And so that's where these names come from. So they're describing the forms of the words that you see. And so you have to be very meticulous and and mathematical when you're doing these kinds of correspondences. But I do appreciate y'all commentary and your questions. And so we kind of went over. I was supposed to end at 8, so we went 40 minutes over, 41 minutes as of right now. And so, but I hope, and I don't intend to change your mind on the spot, Brother Abbasi. But I hope I've given you some resources so that you can kind of just follow the trail of what the actual establishment is saying, in regards to these languages, and never go by what they say. It's always about what you can prove and demonstrate. And so you're going to have to learn how to do historical comparative linguistics and then go back and revisit to see if that's what is being done in these particular texts. And then we can have a more serious conversation. And so with that said, I do appreciate each and every one of you for joining the conversation. And make sure, again, like if you want to see the more recent interview and you want the peer-reviewed, my latest peer-reviewed article on the etymology of the word netter, join the Patreon and, help keep the channel. And you'll also be supporting the development of the film as well. Chiana Into, which is based on a lot of this research. And so thank you all for joining. Sorry I couldn't get to all the comments, and I'll just have to read that at a later time. But y'all have a good night, and I will see you all later. And so with that said, I am out.